So once again, welcome on in. Welcome everyone. As we are finishing up our reading of King in Yellow. We've been enjoying it. I think I turned that lights just a smidge. Okay, that's good. Let's get started. Okay. Section. The Street of Our Lady of the Fields. Time for me to butcher up some French. Et tous les jours passés dans le tristesse ne sont comptés comme des jours heureux. Something like that. The street is not fashionable, neither is it shabby. It is a pariah among streets, a section without a quarter. It is generally understood to lie out the pale of the aristocratic Avenue de l'Observatoire. The students at the Montparnasse Quarter. Oh gosh, these French things are killing me. The students of the Montparnasse Quarter consider it swell and will have none of it. The Latin Quarter from the Luxembourg, its northern frontier, sneers at its respectability and regard with disfavor the correctly costumed students who haunt it. Few strangers go into it. Times, however, the Latin Quarter students use it as a thoroughfare between the Rue des Reines and the Bullière. But except for that, in the weekly afternoon visits of parents and guardians to the convent near the Rue Vavin, the Street of Our Lady of the Fields is as quiet as a Passy boulevard. Perhaps the most respectable portion lies between the Rue de la Grande Chaumière and the Rue Vavin. At least this was the conclusion arrived at by the Reverend Joel Bryan, as he rambled through it with Hastings in charge. To Hastings, the street looked pleasant in the bright June weather, and he had begun to hope for its selection when the Reverend Bryan shied violently at the cross on the convent opposite. Jesuits, he muttered. Well, said Hastings wearily, imagine we won't find anything better. Say yourself that vice is triumphant in Paris. Seems to me that in every street we find Jesuits or something worse. After a moment he repeated, or something worse, which is of course... which of course I wouldn't notice except for your kindness in warning me. Dr. Bryan sucked in his lips and looked about him. He was impressed by the evident respectability of the surroundings. The frowning of the convent, he took Hastings' arm and shuffled across the street to an iron gateway which bore the number 201, beast painted in white on the blue ground. Below this was a notice printed in English. 1. For porter, please oppress once. For servant, please oppress twice. For parlor, please oppress thrice. Hastings touched the electro button 3 times, and they were ushered through the garden and into the parlor by a trim maid. The dining room door just beyond was open, and from the table in plain view a stout woman hastily arose and came toward them. Hastings caught a glimpse of a young man with a big head and several snuffy old gentlemen at breakfast. Before the door closed and the stout woman waddled into the room, bringing with her an aroma of coffee and a black poodle. It is a pleasure to you receive, she cried. Monsieur is English, no American, of course. My pension it is for Americans, surtout. You all speak English, sis. Adieu, the personnel. The servants do speak. Please on moi, a little. I'm happy to have your pensionnaires. Madame, began Dr. Bryan, but was cut short again. Yes, I know, mon Dieu. You do not speak French, but you have come to learn. My husband does speak French with the pensionnaires. We have at the moment a family American who learn my husband French. Here the poodle growled at Dr. Bryan and was promptly cuffed by his mistress. "Vatu, she Veslap. Vatu, Olivilin. Madame," said Hastings, smiling. "Il n'a pas la très force." The poodle fled, and his mistress cries, "Ah, the accent charming. He does speak already French like a Parisian young gentleman." Then Dr. Bryan managed to get in a word or two and gathered more or less information with regard to prices. "I see that pension, sir. My clientele is of the best. Indeed, a pension de family where one is at home." Just so you know, I'm reading this phonetically, so I'm not trying to do a thing intentionally. Then they went upstairs to examine Hastings' future quarters, test the bed springs, and arrange for the weekly towel allowance. Dr. Bryan appeared satisfied. Madame Moreau accompanied them to the door and rang for the maid, but as Hastings stepped out into the gravel walk, his guide and mentor paused a moment and fixed Madame with his watery eyes. "You understand," he said, "that he is a youth of most careful bringing up, and his character and morals are without a stain. He is young and has never been abroad, nor has ever seen a large city, and his parents have requested me, as an old family friend living in Paris, to see that he is placed under good influences. He is to study art, but on no account would his parents wish him to live in the Latin Quarter, if they knew of the immorality which is rife there." A sound like the click of a latch interrupted him, and he raised his eyes, but not time to see the maid slap the big-headed young man behind the parlor door. Madame coughed, cast a deadly glance behind her, and then beamed on Dr. Bryan. "It is well that he come here. Pension more serious. Il ne existe pas. It is not any," she announced with conviction. So, as there was nothing to add, Dr. Bryan joined Hastings at the gate. "I trust," he said, eyeing the convent, "that you will make no acquaintance among Jesuits." Hastings looked at the convent until a pretty girl passed before the gray facade, and then he looked at her. A young fellow with a paintbox and canvas came swinging along, stopped before the pretty girl, said something during a brief but vigorous handshake at which they both laughed, and he went his way, calling back, "A demain, Valentine." As in the same breath she cried, "A demain." Valentine, thought Hastings, what a quaint name. And he started to follow Reverend Joel Bryan, who was shuffling towards the nearest tramway station. Chapter 2. "And you are pleased with Paris, Monsieur Austin?" demanded Madame Moreau. The next morning, as Hastings came up into the breakfast room of the pension, rosy from his plunge in the limited bath above. "I'm sure I shall like it," he replied, wondering at his own depression of spirits. The maid brought him coffee and rolls. He returned the vacant glance of the big-headed young man and acknowledged diffidently the salutes of the snuffy old gentleman. He did not try to finish his coffee and sat crumbling a roll, unconscious of the sympathetic glances of Madame Moreau, who had tact enough not to bother him. Presently a maid entered with a tray on which were balanced 2 bowls of chocolate, and the snuffy old gentleman leered at her ankles. The maid deposited the chocolate at a table near the window and smiled at Hastings. That a thin young lady, followed by her counterpart in all except years, marched into the room and took the table near the window. They were evidently American, but Hastings, if he expected any sign of recognition, was disappointed. To be ignored by compatriots intensified his depression. He fumbled with his knife and looked at his plate. The thin young lady was talkative enough. She was quite aware of Hastings' presence, ready to be flattered if he looked at her, but on the other hand she felt her superiority, for she had been 3 weeks in Paris, and he, as it was easy to see, had not yet unpacked his steamer trunk. Her conversation was complacent. She argued with her mother upon the relative merits of the Louvre and the Bon Marche, but her mother's parts of the discussion were mostly confined to observation. By Susie! The snuffy old gentleman had left the room in a body outwardly polite and inwardly raging. They could not endure the Americans who filled the room with their chatter. The big-headed young man looked after them with a knowing cough, murmuring, "Gay old birds." "They look like bad old men, Mr. Bladen," said the girl. To this, Mr. Bladen smiled and said, "They've had their day," in a tone which implied that he was now living his. And that's why they all have baggy eyes, cried the girl. I think it's a shame for young gentlemen. Why, Susie, said the mother, and the conversation lagged. After a while, Mr. Bladen threw down the petit journal, which he daily studied at the expense of the house, and turned to Hastings. Started to make himself agreeable, began by saying, I see you are American. To this brilliant and original opening, Hastings, deadly homesick, replied gratefully, and the conversation was judiciously nourished by observations from Miss Susie, Byng directly addressed to Mr. Bladen. In the course of events, Miss Susie, forgetting to address herself exclusively to Mr. Bladen, and Hastings, replying to her general question, the entente cordiale was established, and Susie and her mother extended a protectorate over what was clearly neutral territory. Mr. Hastings, you must not desert the pension every evening as Mr. Bladen does. Paris is an awful place for young gentlemen, and Mr. Bladen is a horrid cynic. Mr. Bladen looked gratified. Hastings answered, I shall be at my studio all day, and I imagine I shall be glad enough to come back at night. Mr. Bladen, who had a salary of $15 a week, acted as agent for the puny manufacturing company of Troy, New York, smiled a skeptical smile, and withdrew to keep an appointment with a customer on the Boulevard Magenta. Hastings walked into the garden with Mrs. Byng and Susie. At their invitation sat down in the shade before the iron gate. The chestnut trees still bore their fragrant spikes of pink and white, and the bees humming among the rose trestles on the white-walled house. A faint freshness was on the air. The watering carts moved up and down the street, and a clear stream bubbled over the spotless gutters of the Rue de la Grande Chaumière. The sparrows were merry along the curbstones, taking bath after bath in the water and ruffling their feathers with delight. In a walled garden across the street, a pair of blackbirds whistled among the almond trees. Hastings swallowed the lump in his throat, for the song of the birds and the ripple of water in a Paris gutter brought back to him the sunny meadows of Millbrook. That's a blackbird, observed Miss Byng. See him there on the brush with pink blossoms? He's all black except his bill, and that looks as if it had been dipped in an omelette, some Frenchman says. Why, Susie, said Miss Byng. Garden belongs to a studio inhabited by 2 Americans, continued the girl serenely. I often see them pass. They seem to need a great many models, mostly young and feminine. Why, Susie! Perhaps they prefer painting that kind, but I don't see why they should invite 5 with 3 or more young gentlemen, and all go into 2 cabs and drive away singing This Street, she continued. It is dull. There is nothing to see except the garden and a glimpse of the Boulevard Montparnasse through the Rue de la Grande Chaumière. No one ever passes except a policeman. There is a convent on the corner. I thought it was a Jesuit college, began Hastings. Was at once overwhelmed with the Baedeker description of the place, ending with, one side stand the Palatal hotels of Jean-Paul Laurens and Guillaume Bourgereau, and opposite in the little passage Stanislas. Carolus Duran paints the masterpieces which charm the world. The blackbird burst into a ripple of gold, throaty notes, and from some distant green spot in the city an unknown wild bird answered with a frenzy of liquid trills, until the sparrows paused in their ablutions to look upon the restless chirps. Then a butterfly came and sat on a cluster of heliotrope, and waved his crimson bended wings in the hot sunshine. Hastings knew him for a friend. Before his eyes there came a vision of tall mullions and scented milkweed alive with painted wings, a vision of a white house, and woodbine-covered piazza, a glimpse of a man reading and a woman leaning over the pansy bed. His heart was full. He was startled a moment later by Miss Byng. I believe you are homesick. Hastings blushed. Miss Byng looked at him with a sympathetic sigh and continued. Whenever I felt homesick, at first I used to go with Mama and walk in the Luxembourg Gardens. I don't know what it is, but those old-fashioned guardians seem to bring me nearer home than anything in this artificial city. But they are full of marble statues, said Sis Rang mildly. I don't see the resemblance myself. Where's the Luxembourg? Inquired Hastings after a silence. Come with me to the gate, said Miss Byng. He rose and followed her. She pointed out the Rue Vin at the foot of the street. You pass by the convent to the right, she smiled, and Hastings went. Chapter 3. The Luxembourg was a blaze of flowers. He walked slowly through the avenues of trees, past mossy marbles and old-time columns, and threading the grove by the bronze lion, came upon the tree-crowned terrace above the fountain. Below lay the basin shining in the sunlight. Flowering almonds circled the terrace, and in a greater spiral groves of chestnuts wound in and out and down among the moist thickets by the western palace wing. At one end of the avenue of trees the observatory rose, its white domes piled up like an eastern mosque. At the other end stood the heavy palace, with every window pane ablaze in the fierce sun of June. Around the fountain, children and white-capped nurses armed with bamboo poles were pushing toy boats, whose sails hung limp in the sunshine. A dog policeman wearing red epaulettes and a dress sword watched him for a while and then went away to remonstrate with a young man who had unchained his dog. The dog was pleasantly occupied in rubbing grass and dirt into his back while his legs waved into the air. The policeman pointed at the dog. He was speechless with indignation. Well, Captain, smiled the young fellow. Well, Monsieur Student, growled the policeman. What do you come and complain to me for? If you don't chain him, I'll take him, shouted the policeman. That to me, mon capitaine. What? Isn't that bulldog yours? If it was, don't you suppose I'd chain him? The officer glared at a moment in silence, then deciding that, as he was a student, he was wicked, grabbed at the dog, who promptly dodged. Around and around the flower beds they raced. And when the officer came too near for comfort, the bulldog cut across the flower bed, which perhaps was not playing fair. The young man was amused. The dog also seemed to enjoy the exercise. The policeman noticed this and died to strike at the fountainhead of the evil. He stormed up to the student and said, As owner of this public nuisance, I arrest you. But, objected the other, I disclaimed the dog. That was a poser. It was useless to attempt to catch the dog until 3 gardeners lent a hand, but then the dog simply ran away and disappeared in the Rue des Medici. The policeman shambled off to find consolation among the white-capped nurses, and the student, looking at his watch, stood up yawning. Then, catching sight of Hastings, he smiled and bowed. Hastings walked over the marble, laughing. By Clifford, he said. I didn't recognize you. It's my mustache, said the other. I sacrificed it to humor a whim of... Friend, what do you think of my dog? Then he is yours, cried Hastings. Of course, it's a pleasant change for him. He's playing tag with the policeman, but he is known now, and I'll have to stop it. He's gone home. He always does when the gardeners take a hand. It's a pity, he's fond of rolling on lawns. Then they chatted for a moment at Hastings' prospects, and Clifford politely offered to stand his sponsor at the studio. You see, old Tabby, Dr. Bryan, told me about you before I met you, explained Clifford. And Elliot, we're glad to do anything we can. Then, looking at his watch again, he muttered, I have just 10 minutes to catch the Versailles train. Au revoir. Started to go, but catching sight of a girl advancing by the fountain, took off his hat with a confused smile. Are you not at Versailles? She said, with the most imperceptible acknowledgement of Hastings' presence. I'm going, murmured Clifford. For a moment they faced each other, and then Clifford, very red, stammered, With your permission, I have the honor of presenting you my friend, Monsieur Hastings. Hastings bowed low. She smiled very sweetly, but there was something of malice in the quiet inclination of her small Parisian head. I could have wished, she said, Monsieur Clifford might spare me more time when he brings with him so charming an American. Must I go, Valentine? Began Clifford. Certainly, she replied. Clifford took his leave with a very bad grace, wincing when she added, Give my dearest love to Cecile. As he disappeared in the Rue des Assas, the girl turned as if to go, But then suddenly remembered Hastings looked at him and shook her head. Monsieur Clifford is so perfectly harebrained, she smiled. It's embarrassing sometimes. You have heard, of course, all about his success at the salon? He looked puzzled, and she noticed it. You've been to the salon, of course? I know, he answered. Only lived in Paris 3 days ago. He seemed to pay little heed to the explanation, but continued. Nobody imagined he had the energy to do anything good. But on varnishing day, the salon was astonished by the entrance of Monsieur Clifford. Strolled about as bland as he pleased, with an orchid in his buttonhole, and a beautiful picture on the line. She smiled to herself at the reminiscence, and looked at the fountain. Monsieur Marjorie told me that Monsieur Julien was so astounded that he only shook hands with Monsieur Clifford in a dazed manner, and actually forgot to pat him on the back. Fancy, she continued with merriment. Fancy Papa Julien forgetting to pat one on the back. Hastings, wondering at her quakes with a great Marjorie looked at her with respect. May I ask, he said definitely, whether you were a pupil of Bourgeois? Aye, she said in some surprise. Then she looked at him curiously. Was he permitting himself the liberty of joking on such short acquaintance? His pleasant, serious face questioned hers. 10, she thought, what a droll man. You surely study art, he said. She leaned back on the crooked stick of her parasol and looked at him. Why do you think so? Because you are speaking as if you did. Are making fun of me, she said. It's not good taste. She stopped, confused, as he colored to the roots of his hair. How long have you been in Paris? She said at length. 3 days, he replied gravely. But surely you are not a nouveau. You speak French too well. Then after a pause, you really are a nouveau. I am, he said. She sat down at the marble bench lately occupied by Clifford, and tilting her parasol over her heads, looked at him. I don't believe it. He felt the compliment, for a moment hesitated to declare himself one of the despised. Then, mustering up his courage, he told her how new and green he was, with a frankness which made her blue eyes open wide and her lips part in the sweetest of smiles. Never seen a studio? Never. Nor a model? No. How funny, she said solemnly, then they both laughed. And you? Have you seen studios? Hundreds. And models? Millions. And you know Bourgeois? Yes, and Henner and Constant and Lawrence and the Puvis de Chans and Dagnan and Courteau and all the rest of them. Yet you say you are not an artist. Pardon, she said gravely. Did I say I was not? Do you tell me? He hesitated. First she looked at him, shaking at her, then smiling. Then of a sudden her eyes fell, and she began tracing figures with her parasol on the gravel at our feet. Hastings had taken a place on the seat, now with his elbow at his knees. She sat watching the spray drifting above the fountain jet. A small boy dressed as a sailor stood poking his yacht and crying, I won't go home, I won't go home. His nurse raised her hands to the heavens. Just like a little American boy, thought Hastings, and a pang of homesickness shot through him. Presently the nurse captured the boat, and the small boy stood at bay. Monsieur René, you decide to come here, you may have your boat. The boy backed away, scowling. Give me back my boat, I said, he cried. Don't call me René, for my name's Randall, and you know it. Hello, said Hastings. Randall, that's English. I'm American, announced the boy in perfectly good English, turning to look at Hastings. She's such a fool, she calls me René because Mama calls me Ranny. Here he dodged the exasperated nurse and took up station behind Hastings, who laughed, catching her on the waist, lifted him into his lap. One of my countrymen, he said to the girl beside him. He smiled while he spoke, but there was a queer feeling in his throat. Don't you see the stars and stripes on my yacht? Demanded Randall. Sure enough, the American colors hung limply under the nurse's arm. Oh, cried the girl. He is charming, and impulsively stooped to kiss him. But the infant Randall wiggled out of Hastings' arm, then his nurse pounced upon him with an angry glance at the girl. She reddened and then bit her lips as the nurse, with eyes still fixed on her, dragging the child away, and instantly wiped his lips with her handkerchief. Then she stole a look at Hastings and bit her lip again. What an ill-tempered woman, he said. In America, most nurses are flattered when people kiss their children. For an instant, she tipped the parasol to hide her face. She closed it with a snap and looked at him defiantly. Oh! Hey, we have a raid! Welcome in, Cheshire Jack. Welcome in. Thank you for the raid. Welcome. I am Richard Cobalt. I'm a variety streamer. I play a number of different games, as well as weekly readings on Tuesday nights. And we are currently finishing up our reading of the collection of stories, The King in Yellow. Yeah. But let me see, what were y'all doing? Let me give you a shout out. I hope you had a wonderful stream, and I really appreciate and thank you very much for the raid. I really do appreciate it.
Where's my tall, thin, red-headed snake daddy?
What?
What? Nothing.
What words did you just say at me?
So we don't need to talk about it. That's all right.
I kind of want to talk about it. I feel like there's like some talking that needs to be had about this.
I'm gonna keep my damn mouth shut from now on.
I mean,
no talkies.
You kind of already unleashed that, so here we are.
It was fun. Got to play a game with the wife. It was very enjoyable.
Talk about shit.
Oh, nice. Because it was like how to escape Lost Submarine. Oh, okay. Okay, so it's like a co-op escape type game, or like an escape room, but instead it's like a game or whatever. I'm guessing it takes place in a submarine. That sounds neat. I'm glad you fun little escape room guy. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Sort of like the We Were Here series. Oh, okay. But anyway, so much for the raid, and yeah, we do have Cheshire Jack here will be taking part on Friday. Double checking. I'm sure it's Friday. Yes. I didn't want to gaslight myself and it was a different date. But Friday, at 8 p.m. Central Time, we'll be doing episode 17 of Spilling the Tea with Cheshire Jack here. So, I'm looking forward to that. But yeah. Again, if you have any post-stream care, if you need to do a post-stream care, please do so that. Oh my gosh. Feel free to do that, or please do so. Once again, we are continuing our we're finishing up our read-through of The King in Yellow tonight, so feel free to sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the stream. Yes. Okay. For an instant, she tipped the parasol to hide her face, then closed it with a snap and looked at him defiantly. Do you think it's strange? She objected. Why not? He said in surprise. Again, she looked at him with quick, searching eyes. His eyes were clear and bright, and he smiled back, repeating, Why not? You are droll, she murmured, bending her head. Why? But she made no answer, and sat silent, tracing curves and circles in the dust with her parasol. After a while, he said, I'm glad to see that young people have so much liberty here. I understood that the French were not all like us. In America, or at least where I lived in Millbrook, girls have every liberty, go out alone, and receive their friends alone, and I was afraid I should miss it here. But I see how it is now, and I'm glad I was mistaken. She raised her eyes to this and kept them there. He continued pleasantly. Since I have sat here, I have seen a lot of pretty girls walking alone on the terrace there, and then you are alone too. Tell me, for I do not know French customs, do you have the liberty of going to the theater without a chaperone? For a long time she studied his face, and then with a trembling said, Why do you ask me? Because you must know, of course, he said gaily. Yes, she replied indifferently, I know. He waited for an answer, but getting none, decided that perchance she had misunderstood him. I hope you don't think I mean to presume on our short acquaintance, he began. It is very odd, but I don't know your name. When Mr. Clifford presented me, he only mentioned mine. Is that the custom in France? It is the custom in the Latin Quarter, she said with a queer light in her eye. Then suddenly she began talking almost feverishly. You must know, Monsieur Hastings, that we are all un paysans jeunes here in the Latin Quarter. We are very bohemian, and etiquette and ceremony are out of place. It was for that Monsieur Clifford presented you to me with small ceremony and left us together with less. Only for that I am his friend, and I have many friends in the Latin Quarter, and we all know each other very well. And I am not studying art, but what? He answered, bewildered. I shall not tell you, it's a secret, she said with an uncertain smile. On both cheeks a pink spot was burning, and her eyes were very bright. Then in a moment her face fell. Do you know Monsieur Clifford very intimately? Not very. While she turned to him, gave a grave and a little pale. My name is Valentine. Valentine Tussaud. Might I ask a service of you on such short acquaintance? Oh, he cried, I should be honored. Just only this, she said gently. It's not much. Promise me not to speak to Monsieur Clifford about me. Promise me that you will speak to no one about me. I promise, he said, greatly puzzled. She laughed nervously. I wish to remain a mystery. It was a caprice. But, he began, I hoped you might give Monsieur Clifford permission to present me at your house. My house, she repeated. I mean, where you live. In fact, to present me to your family. The change in the girl's face shocked him. I beg your pardon, he cried, I have hurt you. And as quick as in a flash, she understood him because she was a woman. Both my parents are dead, she said. Presently began again very gently. Would it displease you if I beg you to receive me? It is the custom. I cannot, she answered, then glancing at him. I'm sorry. I should like to, but believe me, I cannot. He bowed seriously and looked vaguely uneasy. It's because I don't wish to. I like you. You are very kind to me. Kind, he said, surprised and puzzled. I like you, she said slowly. And we will see each other sometimes, if you will. At friends' houses. No, not at friends' houses. Where? Here, she said with defiant eyes. Why, he cried. Paris, you are much more liberal in your views than we are. She looked at him very curiously. Yes, we are very bohemian. I think it is charming, he declared. You see, we shall be in the best of society, she ventured timidly, the pretty gesture toward the statues of the dead queens, ranged in stately ranks above the terrace. He looked at her delighted, and she brightened at the success of her innocent little pleasantry. Indeed, she smiled. We should be well chaperoned, because, you see, we're under the protection of the gods themselves. Look! There are Apollo and Juno and Venus on their pedestals, counting them on her small gloved finger, and Ceres, Hercules, and... But I can't make out... Hastings turned to look up at the winged god under whose shadow they were seated. Why, it's love, he said. Chapter 4. There was a nouveau here, drawled Lafat, leaning around his easel and addressing his friend Bowles. There was a nouveau here who was tender and green and appetizing that heaven help him if he should fall into a salad bowl. Hayseed, inquired Bowles, plastering the background with a broken palette knife and squinting at the effect with approval. Yes, Squeakdunk or Oshkosh. And how he ever grew up among the daisies and escaped the cows, heaven alone knows. Bowles rubbed his thumb across the outlines of his study to throw in a little atmosphere, as he said, glared at the model, pulled at his pipe, and finding it out, struck a match on his neighbor's back to relight it. His name, continued Lafat, hurling a bit of bread on the hat rack. His name is Hastings. He's a Barry. He knows no more about the world. And here Mr. Lafat's face spoke volumes for his own knowledge of that planet. Than a maiden cat on its first moonlight stroll. Bowles, now having succeeded in lighting his pipe, repeated the thumb touch on the other side of the study and said, Ah. Yes, continued his friend. And would you imagine he seems to think that everyone here goes on as it does in his little backwoods ranch at home. Talks about the pretty girls who walk alone in the street, says how sensible it is, and how French parents are misrepresented. Oh my gosh, I can speak, I swear. And how French parents are misrepresented in America. Says that for his part, he finds French girls, and he confessed to only knowing one, as jolly as American girls. I tried to set him right, try to give him a pointer as to what sort of ladies walk about alone or with students, and he was either too stupid or too innocent to catch on. Then I gave it to him straight, and he said I was a vile-minded fool and marched off. Did you assist him with your shoe? Inquired Bowles, languidly interested. Well, no. He called you a vile-minded fool. He was correct, said Clifford from his easel in front. Do you mean? Demanded Lafette, turning red. That, replied Clifford. Who spoke to you? Is this your business? Sneered Bowles, but nearly lost his balance as Clifford swung about and eyed him. Yes, he spoke slowly. It's my business. No one spoke for some time. Then Clifford sang out, I say, Hastings. And when Hastings left his easel and came around, he nodded toward the astonished Lafette. This man has been disagreeable to you, and I want to tell you that any time you feel inclined to kick him, I will hold the other creature. Hastings, embarrassed, said, I know, I don't agree with his ideas, nothing more. Clifford said naturally, and slipping his arm through Hastings, strolled about him, and introduced him to several of his own friends, at which all the nouveau opened their eyes with envy. In the studio were given to understand that Hastings, although prepared to do menial work as the last nouveau, was already within the charmed circle of the old, respected and feared, the truly great. The rest finished, the model resumed his place and went work on the chorus of songs and yells and every ear-splitting noise which the art student utters when studying the beautiful. 5 o'clock struck. The model yawned, stretched, and climbed into his trousers, and the noisy contents of 6 studios crowded through the hall and down into the street. 10 minutes later, Hastings found himself on top of a Montreux tram, and shortly afterward was joined by Clifford. They climbed down at the Rue Gay-Lussac. I always stop here, observed Clifford. I like the walk through the Luxembourg. By the way, said Hastings, how can I call on you when I don't know where you live? I live opposite you. The street in the garden where the almond trees are and the blackbirds? Exactly, said Clifford. I'm with my friend Elliot. Hastings thought at the prescription of the 2 American artists who had heard from Miss Susie Bing and looked blank. Clifford continued, perhaps you'd better let me know when you think of coming so that I'll be sure to be here. He ended rather lamely. I shouldn't care to meet any of your model friends there, said Hastings, smiling. You know my ideas are rather straight-laced. I suppose you would say puritanical. I shouldn't enjoy it and wouldn't know how to behave. Oh, I understand, said Clifford, but added with great cordiality. I'm sure we'll be friends, although you may not approve of me and my set, but you will like Severn and Selby because, well, they are like yourself, old chap. After a moment, he continued, there is something I want to speak about. You see, when I introduced you last week in Luxembourg to Valentine. Not a word, cried Hastings, smiling. You must not tell me a word of her. Why? Not a word, he said gaily. I insist. Promise upon your honor you will not speak of her until I give you permission. Promise. I promise, said Clifford, amazed. She's a charming girl. We had a delightful chat after you left, and I thank you for presenting me. But not another word about her until I give you permission. Oh, murmured Clifford. Remember your promise. He smiled as he turned into the gateway. Clifford strolled across the street and, traversing the ivy-colored alley, entered his garden. He felt for his studio key, muttering, I wonder, but of course he doesn't. He entered the hallway and fitted the key into the door, stood staring at the 2 cards tackled over the panels. Foxhall oh wait, crap. Okay, we gotta do an ad break, but then we'll be right back. I'll see you very briefly. Presently. Okay. Okay, continue. Alright. He entered the hallway and fitted the key into the door, stood staring at the two cards tacked over. Yes. Pardon me. He entered the hallway and fit the key into the door, stood staring at the two cards tacked over the panels. Foxhall Clifford, Richard Osborne Elliot. Why the devil does he want me to speak of her? He opened the door and discouraged the caresses of two brindle bulldogs, sank down on the sofa. Elliot sat smoking and sketching with a piece of charcoal by the window. "Hello," he said without looking around. Clifford gazed absently at the back of his head, murmuring, Afraid that man is too innocent, I say, Elliot. At last Hastings. You know the chap there. You know the chap that old Tabby Barn came around here to tell us about. The day you had to hide Colette in the armoire." "Yes? What's up?" "Oh, nothing. He's a brick." "Yes," said Elliot, without enthusiasm. "Don't you think so?" demanded Clifford. "Yes, but he's going to have a tough time when some of his illusions are dispelled. More shame to those who dispel them. Yes, wait until he comes to pay his call on us unexpectedly, of course." Clifford looked virtuous and lighted a cigar. "I was going to say," he observed, "I may have asked him to come without letting us know, so I can postpone any orgy you may have intended." "Ah," cried Elliot indignantly. "Suppose you have to put it that way." "Exactly," grinned Clifford, then more seriously. "I don't want anything to occur here to bother him. He's a brick, and it's a pity we can't be more like him." "I am," observed Elliot complacently, "only living with you." "Listen," cried the other. "I've managed to keep my foot in it in great style. Do you know what I've done? The first time I met him in the street, or rather it was in Luxport, I introduced him to Valentine." "Did he object?" "Believe me," said Clifford solemnly, "this rustic Hastings has no more idea that Valentine is in fact his Valentine, than he has as that he himself is a beautiful example of moral decency in a quarter where morals are as rare as elephants. I heard enough in a conversation between that blackguard Lafont and the little immoral eruption bowels to open my eyes. I tell you, Hastings is a trump. He's a healthy, clean-minded young fellow bred in a small country village, brought up with the idea that saloons are way stations to hell. And as for women—" "Well," demanded Elliot. "Well," said Clifford, "his idea of the dangerous woman is probably a painted Jezebel." "Probably," replied the other. "He's a trump," said Clifford, "and if he swears the world is as good and pure as his own heart, I'll swear he's right." Elliot rubbed his charcoal on his file to get a point, and turned his sketch, saying, "You'll never hear any pessimism from Richard Osborne E. He's a lesson to me," said Clifford. Then he unfolded a small perfumed note, written on rose-colored paper, which had been lying on the table before him. He read it, smiled, whistled a bar or two from Miss Elliot, and sat down to answer it on his best cream-laid note paper. When it was written and sealed, he picked up his stick and marched up and down the studio 2 or 3 times, whistling. "Going out?" inquired the other without turning. "Yes," he said, but lingered a moment over Elliot's shoulder, watching him pick out the light in his sketch with a bit of bread. "Tomorrow is Sunday," he observed after a moment's silence. "Well," inquired Elliot, "have you seen Colette?" "No, I will tonight. She and Rodin and Jacqueline are coming to Bouillon's. Suppose you and Cecile will be there." "Well, no," replied Clifford. "Cecile dines at home tonight, and I had an idea of going to Minon's." Elliot looked at him with disapproval. "You can make all arrangements for La Roche without me," he continued, avoiding Elliot's eyes. "What are you up to now?" "Nothing," protested Clifford. "Don't tell me," replied his chum with scorn. "Don't rush off to Minon's when the set dine at Bouillon's. Who is it now? But no, I won't ask that. What's the use?" Then he lifted up his voice and complained and beat upon the table with his pipe. "What's the use of ever trying to keep track of you? What will Cecile say? Oh, yes, what will she say? It's a pity you can't be constant 2 months, yes, by Jove. And the quarter is indulgent, but you abuse its good nature and mine, too." Presently he arose and jammed his hat on his head, marched to the door. Heaven alone knows why anyone puts up with your antics, but they all do, and so do I. If I was Cecile, or any other pretty fools after whom you have toddled and will in all human probabilities continue to toddle, I say if I were Cecile I'd spank you. Now I'm going to Bouillon's, and as usual I shall make excuses for you, and arrange the affair, and I don't care a continental where you are going. But by the skull of the studio skeleton, if you don't turn up tomorrow night with your sketching kit under one arm and Cecile under the other, if you don't turn up in good shape, I'm done with you, and the rest can think what they please. Good night. Clifford said good night with as pleasant a smile as he could muster, and then sat down with his eyes on the floor. He stood out his watch and gave Elliot 10 minutes to vanish, then rang the concierge's call, murmuring, oh dear, what the devil do I do? Why the devil do I do it? Alfred, he said, as the grimlet-eyed person answered the call. Make yourself clean and proper, Alfred, and replace your sabots with a pair of shoes, then put on your best hat and take this letter to the big white house en Rue de Dragon. There is no answer, mon petit Alfred. The concierge departed with a snort in which unwillingness for the errand and affection for M. Clifford were blended. Then with great care the young fellow arranged himself in all the beauties of his and Ellie's wardrobes. He took his time about it, and occasionally interrupted his toilet to play his banjo or make pleasing diversion for the bulldogs by gambling about on all fours. I've got 2 hours before me, he thought, and borrowed a pair of Elliot's silken footgear, with which he and the dogs played ball until he decided to put them on. Then he lighted a cigarette and inspected his dress coat, which he had emptied of 4 handkerchiefs, a fan, and a pair of crumpled gloves as long as his arm. He decided it was not suited to add éclat to his charms, and cast about in his mind for a substitute. Elliot was too thin. And anyway, his coats were now under lock and key. Raudin probably was as badly off as himself. Hastings was the man. But when he threw on his smoking jacket and sauntered over to Hastings' house, he was informed that he had been gone over an hour. And where in the name of all that's reasonable could he have gone? Muttered Clifford, looking down the street. The maid didn't know, so he bestowed upon her a fascinating smile and lounged back to the studio. Hastings was not far away. The Luxembourg is within 5 minutes' walk of the Rue Notre-Dame des Champs, and there he sat under the shadow of a winged god. And there he had sat for an hour, poking holes in the dust and watching the steps which led from the northern terrace to the fountain. The sun hung a purple globe above the misty hills of the Moudon. Long streamers of clouds touched with rose swept low on the western sky, and the domes of the distant Invalides burned like an opal through the haze. Behind the palace, the smoke from a high chimney mounted straight in the air, purple until it crossed the sun, where it changed to a bar of smoldering fire. High above the darkening foliage of the chestnuts, the twin towers of Saint Sulpice rose, an ever-deepening silhouette. A sleepy blackbird was caroling in some near thicket, and pigeons passed and repassed with the whisper of soft winds in their wings. The light on the palace windows had died away, and the dome of the Pantheon swam aglow with the northern terrace, a fiery Valhalla in the sky, while below in the grim array along the terrace ranged, the marble ranks of queens looked out into the west. From the end of the long walk by the northern facade of the palace came the noise of the buses and the cries of the street. Hastings looked at the palace clock. 6 on his watch agreed with it. He fell to poking holes in the graphite, and a constant stream of people passed between the Odeon and the fountain. Priests in black with silver-buckled shoes, lined soldiers, slouchy and rakish, neat girls with hats bearing millionaire's boxes, students with black portfolios and high hats, students with berets and big canes, nervous, quick-stepping officers, symphonies in turquoise and silver, ponderous jangling cavalrymen all over dust, pastry cooks, boys skipping along with utter disregard for the safety of the basket balanced on the impish head. and then the lean outcast, the shambling Paris tramp, slouching with shoulders bent, and little eye furtively scanning the ground for smokers' refuse. All these moved in a steady stream across the fountain circle and out into the city of the Odeon, whose long arcades were now beginning to flicker with gas jets. The melancholy bells of St. Sulpice stroked the hour, and the clock tower of the palace lighted up. Then Burns' steps sounded across the gravel, and Hastings raised his head. How late you are, he said, but his voice was hoarse, and only his flushed face told how long he had seemed waiting. She said, I was kept, indeed. So much annoyed, and I will only stay a moment. As she sat down beside him, casting a furtive glance over her shoulder at the god upon his pedestal. But a nuisance, the intruding Cupid still there. Wings and arrows, too, said Hastings, unheeded her motion to be seated. Wings, she murmured, is to fly away with when he's tired of his play. Of course it was a man who conceived the idea of wings. Otherwise Cupid would have been insupportable. Do you think so? Ma foi, it's what men think. And women? Oh, she said with a toss of her small head. I really forget what we were speaking of. We were speaking of love, said Hastings. I was not, said the girl, then looking up at the marble god. I don't care for this one at all. I don't believe he knows how to shoot his arrow. No, indeed, for he is a coward. He creeps up like an assassin in the twilight. I don't approve of cowardice, she announced, and turned her back on the statue. I think, said Hastings quietly, that he does shoot fairly, yes, and even gives one warning. Is it your experience, Monsieur Hastings? He looked straight into her eyes and said, He is warning me. Heed the warning, then, she cried with a nervous laugh. As she spoke, she stripped off her gloves, and then carefully proceeded to draw them on again. When this was accomplished, she glanced at the palace clock, saying, Dear, how late it is. Furled her umbrella, then unfurled it, and finally looked at him. No, he said, I shall not heed his warning. Oh dear, she sighed again. Still thinking about that tiresome statue, stealing a glance at his face. I suppose you are in love. I don't know, he muttered. I suppose I am. She raised her head with a quick gesture. You seem delighted at the idea, she said, but bit her lip and trembled at his eyes met hers. Then sudden fear came over her and she sprang up, staring into the gathering shadows. Are you cold? He said. She only answered, Dear, oh dear, it's late. It's late. I must go. Good night. She gave him her glove and a moment, and then withdrew it with a start. What is it? He insisted. Are you frightened? She looked at him strangely. No, not frightened. You're very good to me. By Jove, he burst out. What do you mean by saying I'm good to you? That's at least the third time, and I don't understand. The sound of a drum from the guardhouse at the palace cut him short. Listen, she whispered. They're going to close. It's late, oh so late. The rolling of the drum came nearer and nearer. Then the silhouette of the drummer cut the sky above the eastern terrace. The fading light lingered a moment on his belt and bayonet. Then he passed into the shadows, drumming the echoes awake. The roll became fainter along the eastern terrace, then grew and rattled with increasing sharpness when he passed the avenue by the bronze lion and turned down the western terrace walk. Louder and louder the drums sounded, and the echoes struck back the notes from the gray palace wall. And now the drummer loomed up before them, his red trousers a dull spot in the gathering gloom. The brass of his drum and bayonet touched with a pale spark. His epaulets tossed on his shoulders. He passed, leaving the crash of the drum in their ears, and far into the alley of the trees. They saw his little tin cup shining on his haversack. Then the sentinels began the monotonous cry, Au femme, au femme, and the bugle blew from the barracks in the Rue de Tonon. Femme, femme. Good night, she whispered. I must return alone tonight. He watched her until she reached the northern terrace, and then sat down on the marble seat until a hand on his shoulder and a glimmer of bayonets warned him away. She passed through the grove and turned into the Rue de Medici, traversed to the boulevard. At the corner she brought a bunch of violets and walked on along the boulevard to the Rue de École. A grab was brought up before Bouillon's, and a pretty girl, aided by Elliot, jumped out. Valentine, cried the girl, come with us. I can't, she said, stopping a moment. I have a rendezvous at Mignon's. Not Victor's, cried the girl, laughing. She passed with a little shiver, nodding good night. Turned into the Boulevard Saint-Germain. She walked a little faster to escape a gay party sitting before the Café Cluny, who called to her to join them. At the door of the Restaurant Mignon stood a black man in buttons. He took off his peaked caps as she mounted the carpeted stairs. Send Eugene to me, she said at the office. And passing through the hallway to the right of the dining room, stopped before a row of paneled doors. A waiter passed, and she repeated her demand for Eugene, who presently appeared, noiselessly skipping, and bowed, murmuring, Madame. Who is here? No one in the cabinet, Madame. And in the half, Madame Madelon and Monsieur Gay, Monsieur de Clamart, Monsieur Clisson, Madame Marie, and Arcette. Then he looked about and bowing again murmured, Monsieur awaits Madame since half an hour, and he knocked at one of the paneled doors bearing the number 6. Clifford opened the door and the girl entered. The garçon bowed her in and whispered, Will Monsieur have the goodness to ring? Vanished. He helped her off with her jacket and took her hat and umbrella. When she was seated at the little table with Clifford opposite, she smiled and leaned forward on both elbows, looking him in the face. What are you doing here? She demanded. Waiting, he replied in accents of adoration. For an instant, she turned and examined herself in the glass. The wide blue eyes, the curling hair, the straight nose, and short curled lip flashed in the mirror an instant only, and then its depths reflected her pretty neck and back. Thus do I turn my back on vanity, she said, and then looking forward again. What are you doing here? Waiting for you, repeated Clifford, slightly troubled. And Cecile? Now don't, Valentine. Do you know, she said calmly, I dislike your conduct. He was a little disconcerted, and rang for Eugene to cover his confusion. The soup was bisque, and the wine Pommery, and the course followed each other with the usual regularity until Eugene brought coffee, and there was nothing left on the table but a small silver lamp. Valentine, said Clifford, after having obtained permission to smoke. Is it the vaudeville or the El Dorado? Or both? Or the Nouveau Cirque, or... It is here, said Valentine. Well, he said, greatly flattered, I'm afraid I couldn't amuse you. Yes, you are funnier than the El Dorado. Now see here, don't guy me, Valentine, you always do, and what they say, a good laugh kills... what? Love and all that. She laughed into her eyes were moist with tears. Tien, she cried, he is dead then. Clifford eyed her with growing alarm. Do you know why I came? She said. No, he replied uneasily, I don't. How long have you made love to me? How long have you made love to me? Well, he admitted, somewhat sort. I should say about a year. It is a year, I think. Are you not tired? He did not answer. Don't you know that I like you too well to ever fall in love with you? She said. Don't you know that we are too good comrades, too old friends for that? And we are not... Do you think I do not know your history, Monsieur Clifford? Don't be so sarcastic here. Don't be unkind, Valentine. I'm not. I'm kind. I'm very kind to you and to Cecile. Cecile is tired of me. I hope she is, said the girl, for she deserves a better fate. Tins, do you know your reputation in the quarter? Of the inconstant, the most inconstant, utterly incorrigible, and no more serious than a gnat on a summer night, poor Cecile. Clifford looked so uncomfortable that she spoke more kindly. I like you. You know that, everybody does. You are a spoiled child here. Everything is permitted you, and everyone makes allowance. But everyone cannot be a victim to caprice. Caprice, he answered. By Jove, the girls of the Latin Quarter are not capricious. Never mind about that. You must not sit in judgment, you of all men. Why are you here tonight? She cried. I'll tell you. Why? Monsieur receives a little note. He sends a little answer. He dresses in his conquering raiment. I don't, said Clifford, very red. You do, and it becomes you, she retorted with a faint smile. Then again, very quietly, I'm in your power. But I know I am in the power of a friend. I have come to acknowledge it to you here. and it's because of that that I am here to beg of you a favor." Clifford opened up his eyes but said nothing. "I'm in great distress of mind. It is Monsieur Hastings." "Well," said Clifford in some astonishment. "I want to speak of you," she continued in a low voice. "I want to ask you to, in case you should speak of me before him, not to say, "I shall not speak of you to him," he said quietly. Can you prevent others?" "I might if I was president. May I ask why?" "It's not fair," she murmured. "You know how he considers me, as he considers every woman. You know how different he is from you and the rest. I've never seen such a man as Monsieur Hastings." He let his cigarette go out unnoticed. "Most afraid of him. Afraid he should know what we all are in the quarter. I do not wish him to know. I do not wish him to turn from me, to cease from speaking to me as he does. You and the rest cannot know what it has been to me. I could not believe him. I could not believe he was so good and noble. I do not wish him to know so soon. He will find out sooner or later. He will find out for himself, and then he will turn away from me." "Why?" she cried passionately. "Why should he turn from me and not from you?" Clifford, much embarrassed, eyed his cigarette. The girl rose, very white. "He is your friend. You have a right to warn him." "He's my friend," he said at length. They looked at each other in silence. Then she cried, "By all that you hold most sacred, you need not warn him." "I shall trust your word," he said pleasantly. Chapter 5. The month passed quickly for Hastings, and left very definite impressions after it. It did leave some, however. Was a painful impression of meeting Mr. Baldin on the Boulevard des Capucines in the company with the very pronounced young person whose laugh dismayed him. At last he escaped from the cafe where Mr. Baldin had hauled him to join them in a block. He felt as if the whole boulevard was looking at him and judging him by his company. Later, an instinctive conviction regarding the young person with Mr. Baldin set the hot blood into his cheek, and he returned to the pension in such a miserable state of mind that Miss Bang was alarmed and advised him to conquer his homesickness at once. Another impression was equally vivid. One Saturday morning, feeling lonely, his wandering about the city brought him to the Gare Saint-Lazare. It was early for breakfast, but he entered the Hotel Terminus and took a table near the window. As he wheeled about to give his order, a man passed rapidly along the aisle, collided with his head, and looked upon to receive the expected apology. He was met instead by a slap on his shoulder and a hearty, "What the deuce are you doing here, old chap?" It was Rowden, who seized him and told him to come along. So mildly protesting, he was ushered into a private dining room where Clifford, rather red, jumped up from the table and welcomed with a startled air which was softened by the unaffected glee of Rowden and the extreme courtesy of Elliot. The latter presented him to three bewitching girls who welcomed him so charmingly and seconded Rowden in his demand that Hastings should be made one of the party, that he consented at once. While Elliot briefly outlined the projected excursion to La Roche, Hastings, delighted as ate his omelette, returned the smiles of the encouragement from Cecile and Colette and Jacqueline. Meantime, Clifford, in a bland whisper, was telling Rowden what an ass he was. Poor Rowden looked miserable until Elliot, divining how affairs were turning, frowned on Clifford, and found a moment to let Rowden know that they were all going to make the best of it. "You shut up," he observed to Clifford. "It's fate, and that settles it." "It's Rowden, and that settles it," murmured Clifford, concealing a grin, for after all he was not Hastings' wet nurse. So it came about that the train which left the Gare Saint-Lazare at 9:15 stopped a moment in its career towards Havre, and deposited at the Red Roof station of La Roche a merry party armed with sunshades, trout rods, and one cane carried by the non-combatant Hastings. When they had established a camp in a grove of sycamores which bordered the little river, Clifford, who acknowledged the master of all that pertained to sportsmanship, took command. "You, Rowden," he said, Divide your flies with Elliot and keep an eye on him, or else he'll be trying to put on a float and sinker. Prevent him by force from grubbing about for worms. Elliot protested, but he was forced to smile in a general laugh. You make me ill, he asserted. Do you think this is my first trout? She'll be delighted to see your first trout, said Clifford, and dodging a fly hook hurled with intent to hit, proceeded to sport and equip 3 slender rods destined to bring joy and fish to Cecile, Colette, and Jacqueline. With perfect gravity, he ornated each line with 4 split shot, a small hook, and a brilliant quill float. I shall never touch the worms, announced Cecile with a shudder. Jacqueline and Colette hastened to sustain her, and Hastings pleasantly offered to act in the capacity of general baiter and take her off a fish. But Cecile, doubtless fascinated by the gaudy flies in Clifford's book, decided to accept lessons from him in the true art, and presently disappeared up the epiture with Clifford in tow. Elliot looked doubtfully at Colette. I prefer gudgeons, that dem's oath decision, and you and Monsieur Rodin may go away when you please, may they not, Jacqueline? Certainly, responded Jacqueline. Elliot, undecided, examined his rod and reel. You've got your reel on the wrong side. You've got your reel on the wrong side up, observed Rodin. But wavered and stole a glance at Colette. I've almost decided to, not to flip the flies about you just now, he began. That's the pole that Cecile left. Don't call it a pole, corrected Rodin. Rod, then, continued Elliot, and started off in the wake of the 2 girls, but was promptly collared by Rodin. No, you don't. Fancy a man fishing with a float and sinker when he has a fly rod in his hand. You come along. And the placid little epitor flows down between its thicket to the Seine. A grassy bank shadows the haunt of the gudgeon, and on this bank sat Colette and Jacqueline and chattered and laughed and watched the swerving of the scarlet quills, while Hastings, his hat over his eyes, his head on a bank of moss, listened to their soft voices, and chattered and laughed and watched this essentially unhooked the small and indignant gudgeon when a flash of a rod, a suppressed scream announced the catch. The sunlight filtered through the leafy thickets, awakening to song the forest birds. Magpies in spotless black and white flirted past, alighting near by with a hop and a bound, and twitch of the tail. Blue and white jays with rosy breasts shrieked through the trees, and a low sailing hawk wheeled among the fields of ripening wheat, put to flight flocks of twittering hedge birds. Across the Seine, a gull dropped in the water like a plume. The air was pure and still. Scarcely a leaf moved. Sounds from a distant farm came faintly. The shrill crow and a dull bang. Now and then a steam tug with big raking smoke pipe bearing the name Coupe 27 plowed up the river, dragging its interminable train of barges, or a sailboat dropped down with the current toward sleepy Rhone. A faint fresh odor of earth and water hung in the air, and through the sunlight orange-tipped butterflies glanced about the marsh grasses. Soft velvety butterflies flapped through the mossy woods. Hastings was thinking of Valentine. It was 2 o'clock when Elliot strolled back, and frankly admitting that he had eluded Rodin, sat down beside Colette and prepared to doze with satisfaction. Where are your trout? Said Colette severely. They still live, murmured Elliot, and went fast asleep. Rodin returned shortly after, and casting a scornful glance at the slumbering one, displayed 3 crimson-flecked trout. And that, smiled Hastings lazily, that is the holy end to which the faithful plod, the slaughter of these small fish with a bit of silk and feather. Rodin disdained to answer him. Colette caught another gudgeon and awoke Elliot, who protested and gazed about for the lunch baskets, as Clifford and Cecile came up demanding instant refreshment. Cecile's skirts were soaked and her gloves torn, but she was happy, and Clifford, dragging out a 2-pound trout, stood still to receive the applause of the company. Where the deuce did you get that? Demanded Elliot. Cecile, wet and enthusiastic, recounted the battle, and then Clifford eulogized her powers with the fly, and in proof produced from his reel a defunct chub which, he observed, just missed being a trout. They were all very happy at luncheon, and Hastings was voted charming. He enjoyed it immensely, only it seemed to him at the moments that flirtation went further in France than in Millbrook, Connecticut, and he thought that Cecile might be a little less enthusiastic about Clifford, that perhaps might be quite as well if Jacqueline sat further away from Modane, and that possible Colette could have, for a moment at least, taken her eyes from Elliot's face. Still, he enjoyed it, except that when he was thoughtless, arrived at Valentine, and then he felt that he was far away from her. La Roche at least an hour and a half from Paris. It was also true that he felt a happiness, a quick heartbeat when at 8 o'clock at night the train which bore them from La Roche rolled into the Gare Saint-Lazare, and he was at once more in the city of Valentine. "Good night," they said, pressing him. "You must come with us next time." He promised and watched them, 2 by 2, drift up in the darkening city, and stood so long that, when he again raised his eyes, the vast boulevard was twinkling with gas, and it through with the electric lights stared like moons. It was with another quick heartbeat that he woke next morning, for his first thought was of Valentine. The sun already gilded the towers of Notre Dame. The clatter of workmen's sabots awoke sharp echoes in the street below, and across the way a blackbird in a pink almond tree was going into an ecstasy of trills. He determined to awake Clifford for a brisk walk in the country, hoping later to beguile that gentleman into the American church for his soul's sake. He found Alfred the gimlet-eyed washing the asphalt walk which led to the studio. "Monsieur Elliot," replied to the perfunctory inquiry, "je ne sais pas." "Monsieur Clifford," he began Hastings, with somewhat astonished. "Sir Clifford," said the concierge with fine irony, "will be pleased to see you. As he retired early, in fact, he has just come in." Hastings hesitated, while the concierge pronounced a fine eulogy on people who never stayed out all night, and then came battering on the lodge gate during hours which even a gendarme held sacred to sleep. It was also discoursed eloquently upon the beauties of temperance, and took an ostentatious draught from the fountain in the court. "Do not think I will come in," said Hastings. "Pardon, monsieur," growled the concierge. "Perhaps it will be well to see Monsieur Clifford. He possibly needs aid. He drives forth with hairbrushes and boots. It is a mercy he has not set fire to something with his candle." Hastings hesitated for a moment, yet swallowing his dislike of such a mission, walked slowly through the ivory-colored alley and crossed the inner garden to the studio. He knocked. Perfect silence. Then he knocked again, and this time something struck the door from within it with a crash. That, said the concierge, was a boot. He fitted his duplicate key into the lock and ushered Hastings in. Clifford, in disordered evening dress, sat on the rug in the middle of the room. He held in his hand a shoe, and did not appear astonished to see Hastings. "Good morning. Do you use Pierre's soap?" he inquired with a vague wave of his hand and a vague smile. Hastings' heart sank. "For heaven's sake," he said. "Clifford, go to bed." "Not well that Alfred pokes his shaggy head in here. I have a shoe left." Hastings blew out the candle and picked up Clifford's hat and cane and said, with an emotion he could not conceal, This is terrible, Clifford. I never knew you did this sort of thing." "Well, I do," said Clifford. "Where is Elliot?" "Chap," returned Clifford, maudlin. "Providence which feeds sparrows and that sort of thing, watcheth over the intemperate wanderer." "Where is Elliot?" But Clifford only wagged his head and waved his arm about. "He's out there, somewhere about." And feeling a desire to see his missing chum, lifted up his voice and howled for him. Hastings, thoroughly shocked, set him down on the lounge without a word. Presently, after shedding several scalding tears, Clifford brightened up and rose with great precaution. "Old chap," he observed, "do you want to see a miracle? Well, here goes. I'm going to begin." He paused, beaming at vacancy. Miracle," he repeated. Hastings supposed he was alluded to the miracle of his keeping his balance, and said nothing. "I'm going to bed," he announced. "Poor old Clifford's going to bed, and that's a miracle," he said with a nice calculation of distance and equilibrium, which would have wrung enthusiastic yells of applause from Elliot. had he been there to assist en connaisseur. But he was not. He had not yet reached the studio. He was on his way, however, and smiled with magnificent condescension on Hastings, who half an hour later found him reclining upon a bench in the Luxembourg. He permitted himself to be aroused, dusted, and escorted to the gate. He, however, refused all further assistance, and Bessot's patronizing bow upon Hastings steered a tolerable true course for the Rue Vavin. Hastings watched him out of sight, then slowly retraced his steps toward the fountain. At first he felt gloomy and depressed, but gradually the clear air of the morning lifted the pressure from his heart. He sat on the marble seat under the shadow of the winged god. The air was fresh and sweet with perfume from the orange flower. Everywhere, pigeons were bathing, dashing the water on their iris-hued breasts, flashed in and out of the spray or nestling almost to the neck alone the polished basin. The sparrows, too, were abroad in force, soaking their dust-colored feathers in the limpid pool, and chirping with might and main. Under the sycamores which surrounded the duck pond opposite the fountains of Marie de Medici, the waterfowl cropped the herbage or waddled in rows down the bank to embark on some solemn, aimless cruise. Butterflies, somewhat lame from a chilly night's repose under the lilac leaves, crawled over and over the white phlox, or took a rheumatic flight towards some sun-warmed shrub. The bees were already busy among the heliotrope, and one or two gray flies with brick-colored eyes sat in a spot of sunlight beside the marble seat, or chased each other about, only to return again to the spot of sunshine and rub their forelegs, exulting. The sentries paced briskly before the painted boxes, pausing at times to look toward the guardhouse for their relief. They came at last with the shuffle of feet and the click of bayonets. The word was passed, the relief fell out, and away they went, crunch, 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 across the gravel. A mellow chime floated from the clock tower of the palace. The deep bell of St. Sulpice echoed the stroke. Hastings sat dreaming in the shadow of the god, and while he mused, somebody came and sat beside him. At first he did not raise his head. It was only when she spoke that he sprang up. "You at this hour?" "I was restless. I could not sleep." Then a low, happy voice. "And you at this hour?" "I slept, but the sun awoke me." "I could not sleep," she said. Her eyes seemed for a moment touched with an indefinable shadow. Then smiling, "So glad. Seemed to know you were coming. Don't laugh, I believe in dreams." "Do you really dream of my being here?" "I think I was awake when I dreamed it," she admitted. Then for a time they were mute, acknowledging but silent the happiness of being together. And after all their silence was eloquent, for faint smiles and glances born of their thoughts, crossed and recrossed until lips moved and words were formed, which seemed almost superfluous. They said it was not very profound. Perhaps the most valuable jewel that fell from Hastings' lips bore a direct reference to breakfast. "I have not yet had my chocolate," she confessed. "By what a material man you are. Valentine," he said impulsively, I do wish that you would, just for once, give me the whole day, just for this once." "Oh dear," she smiled, "but only material, but selfish." "Or not only material, but selfish." "Not selfish, hungry," he said, looking at her. "A cannibal, too, oh dear." "Will you, Valentine, buy me chocolate?" "Take it with me." "But Déjeuner. Together at St. Cloud." "But I can't." "Together all day long. Will you, Valentine?" She was silent. "Only for this once." Again that indefinable shadow fell across her eyes, and when it was gone, she sighed. "Yes, together, only for this once. All day?" he said, doubting his happiness. "All day," she smiled. "So hungry." He laughed, enchanted. "What a material young lady it is." On the Boulevard St. Michael there was a creamery, painted white and blue outside, and neat and clean as a whistle inside. The auburn-haired young woman who speaks French like a native and rejoices in the name of Murphy smiled at them as they entered, tossing a fresh napkin over the zinc tete-a-tete table, locked before them 2 cups of chocolate and a basket full of fresh croissants. The primrose The primrose-colored pats of butter, each stamped with a shamrock in relief, seemed saturated with the fragrance of Normandy pastures. How delicious, they said in the same breath, and they laughed at the coincidence. But a single thought, he began. How absurd, she cried with cheeks all rosy. Thinking I'd like a croissant. So am I, he replied triumphantly, but that proves it. Then they had a quarrel. She accused him of behaving unworthy of a child in arms, and he denying it and bringing current charges until Mademoiselle Murphy laughed in sympathy. The last croissant was eaten under a flag of truce. Then they rose, and she took his arm with a bright nod to Mille Murphy, who cried them with a merry "Bonjour, madame, bonjour, monsieur," and watched them hail a passing cab and drive away. "Do cool est beau," she sighed, adding after a moment, "Do they be married? I don't know. Ma foi is on ben l'air." I hope everyone's enjoying the kobold speak. Kobold pronounces French badly. Stream. Okay. Ahem. A cab somewhere on the Rue de Medici turned into the Rue de Vaugirard, followed it to where it crosses the Rue de Rennes, and taking that noisy thoroughfare, drew up before the Gare Montparnasse. They were in time for the train and scampered up the straightway out to the cars as the last note from the starting gong rang up through the arched station. The guards slammed the door of their compartment. A whistle sounded answer to a screech by the locomotive, and the long train glided from the station faster, faster, and sped out like the morning sunshine. The summer wind blew in their faces from the open window and sent the soft hair dancing on the girl's forehead. "We have the compartment to ourselves," said Hastings. She leaned against the cushioned window seat, her eyes bright and wide opened, her lips parted. The wind lifted her hat and fluttered the ribbons under her chin. With a quick movement she untied them, and drawing a long hatpin from her hat, laid it down on the seat beside her. The train was flying. The colors surged in her cheek, and with each quick drawn breath, her breath rose and fell under the cluster of lilies at her throat. Trees, house, ponds danced past, cut by a mist of telephone poles. "Faster, faster," she cried. His eyes never left her, but hers, wide open and blue as the summer sun, seemed fixed on something far ahead, something which came no nearer but fled before them as they fled. Was it the horizon, cut now by the grim fortress of the hill, now by the cross of a country chapel? Was it the summer moon, ghost-like, slipping through the vaguer blue above? "Faster, faster," she cried. Her lips burned scarlet. The car shook and shivered, and the fields streamed like an emerald torrent. He caught the excitement, and his face glowed. She cried. With an unconscious movement, caught his hand, drawing to the window beside her. "Look, lean out with me." He only saw our lips move. Her voice was drowned in the roar of a trestle. His hand closed in hers, and he clung to the still. The wind whistled in their ears. "So far out, Valentine. Take care," he gasped. Below, though the ties of the trestle, a broad river flashed into view, and again, as the train thundered along a tunnel, and gave way once more through the freshest of the green fields. The wind roared about them. The girl was leaning far out from the window, and he caught her by the waist, crying, "Not too far!" But she only murmured, "Faster, faster! Away out of the city, out of the land, faster, faster, away out of the world." "What are you saying all to yourself?" he said, but his voice was broken, and the wind whirled it back into his throat. She heard him, and turning from the window, looked down his arm about her. Then she raised her eye to his. The car shook and the windows rattled. They were dashing through a forest now, and the sun swept the dewy branches with running flashes of fire. He looked into her troubled eyes. He drew her to him and kissed the half-parted lips, and she cried out a bitter, hopeless cry. "Not that, not that!" But he held her close and strong, whispering words of honest love and passion, and when he sobbed, That I have promised, you must know, not worthy. In the purity of his own heart, her words were to him meaningless, then meaningless forever after. Presently her voice ceased, and her head rested on his breast. He leaned against the window, his ears swept by the furious wind, his heart in a joyous tumult. The forest was past, and the summer slipped from behind the trees, flooding the earth again with brightness. She raised her eyes and looked out into the world from the window. She began to speak, but her voice was faint, and he bent his head closer to hers and said, I cannot turn from you, I'm too weak. You were long ago my master of my heart and soul. I have broken my word to one who trusted me, but I have told you all, what matters the rest. He smiled at her in innocence, and she worshipped his. She spoke again. Take me or cast me away, what matters it? Not with a word. With a word you can kill me. It might be easier to die than to look upon happiness as great as mine. He took her in his arms. Hush, what are you saying? Look, get the sunlight, the meadow and streams. We shall be very happy in so bright a world. She turned to the sunlight from the windows. The world seemed very fair to her. Trembling with happiness, she sighed, Is this the world? Then I have never known it. Nor have I, God forgive me, he murmured. Perhaps it was our gentle lady of the fields who forgave them both. Dick, that's the end of that story. So here then the last story. Okay. Which, how are we? Okay, so we're gonna do an ad break. So then we don't have to deal with any more ads. Because otherwise it's gonna pop up in 8 minutes. So see you back in just 3 minutes. Okay. Back. Rubari. For let philosopher and doctor preach of what they will and what they will not. Each is but one link in an eternal chain that none can sleep nor break nor overreach. Crimson nor yellow roses nor the savior of the mounting sea are worth the perfume I adore, that clings to thee. The languid-headed lilies tire, the changeless waters weary me. I ache with passion's desire of thine and thee. There are but these things in the world, thy mouth of fire, thy breast, thy hands, thy hair upcurled in my desire. One morning at Julian's, a student said to Selby, "This is Foxhall Clifford," pointing to with his bushes at a young man who sat before an easel, doing nothing. Selby, sigh nervous, walked over him again. "My name is Selby. Just arrived in Paris and bring a letter of introduction." His voice was lost in the crash of a falling easel, the owner of which promptly assaulted his neighbor, and for a time the noise of battle rolled through the studios of M. Boulanger and Lefebvre. Lefebvre, presently subsiding into a scuffle on the stairs outside. Selby, apprehensive as to his own reception in the studio, looked at Clifford, who sat serenely watching the fight. "It's a little noisy in here," said Clifford. "Do you like the fellows here when you know them?" His unaffected manner delighted Selby. Then, with a simplicity that won his heart, he presented him to half a dozen students of as many nationalities. Some were cordial, all were polite. Even the majestic creature who held the position of Monsieur, unbent enough to say, "My friend, when a man speaks French as well as you do, and is also a friend of Monsieur Clifford, you will have no trouble in this studio. Of course, you expect, of course, to fill the stove until the next new man comes." "Of course. And you don't mind chaff?" "No," replied Selby, who hated it. Clifford, much amused, put on his hat, saying, "Just expect lots of it at first." Selby placed his own hat on his head, followed him to the door. As they passed the model, there was a fierce cry of "Chapeau! Chapeau!" Student sprang from his easel, menacing Selby, who reddened but looked at Clifford. "Take off your hat for them," said the latter, laughing. A little embarrassing, he turned and saluted the studio. "Et moi," cried the model. "You're charming," replied Selby, astonished at his own audacity. But the studio rose, woman shouting, "He has done well, right, he's all right," while the model, laughing, kissed her hand to him and cried, "A demain and beau jeune homme." All that week Selby worked at the studio unmolested. The French students christened him the Enfant Prodigue, which was freely translated the prodigious infant, the Kid Selby, and Kidby. But the disease soon ran its course from Kidby to kidney, and then naturally to Tidbits, where it was arrested by Clifford's authority and ultimately relapsed to Kid. Wednesday came, and with it Mon Boulanger. For 3 hours the students thrived under his biting sarcasms. Among the others, Clifford, who was informed that he knew even less about a work of art than he did about the art of work. Selby was more fortunate. The professor examined his drawings in silence, looked at him sharply, and passed on with a non-committal gesture. He presently departed, arm in arm with Molière, to the relief of Clifford, who was then at liberty to jam his hat on his head and depart. The next day he did not appear, and Selby, who had counted on seeing him at the studio, a thing which he had learned later it was vanity to count on, wandered back to the Latin Quarter alone. Paris was still strange and new to him. He was vaguely troubled by its splendor. No tender memory stirred his American bosom at the Place du Châtelet, nor even by Notre Dame. The Palais de Justice, with its clock and turrets and standing sentinels in blue and vermilion. The Place Saint-Michel, with its jumble of omnibuses and ugly, water-spitting griffins. The hills of Boulevard Saint-Michel, of Saint Michel, the tooting trams, the policemen dawdling 2 by 2 on the table-lined terraces of the Café Vachette, were nothing to him as yet, nor did he even know what he was steeped from the stones of the Place Saint Michel to the asphalt of the boulevard, that he had crossed the frontier and entered the student zone, the famous Latin Quarter. The cabman hailed him as bourgeois and urged the superiority of driving over the walking. A gamin with the appearance of great concern requested the latest telegraphic news from London, and then standing on his head invited Selby to feats of strength. A pretty girl gave him a glance from a pair of violet eyes. He did not to see her, but she, catching her own reflection in a window, wondered at the color burning in her cheeks. Turning to resume her course, she met Foxhale, Clifford, and hurried on. Clifford, open mouth, followed her with his eyes. Then he looked after Selby, who had turned into the Boulevard Saint-Germain toward the Rue de Seine. Then he examined himself in the shop window. The results seemed to be unsatisfactory. Not a beauty, he mused, but neither am I a hobgoblin. What does she mean by blushing at Selby? I never before saw her look at a fellow in my life. Neither has any one in the quarter. Anyway, I can swear she never looks at me, and goodness knows I have done it all that respectful adoration can do. He sighed, and murmuring a prophecy concerning the salvation of his immortal soul, swung into the graceful lounge which all times characterized Clifford. With no apparent exertion, he overtook Selby by the corner, and together they crossed the sunlit boulevard and sat down under the awning of the Café du Cercle. Clifford bowed to everyone on the terrace, saying, "You shall meet them all later, but now let me present you to the two of the sights of Paris, Mr. Richard Elliot and Mr. Stanley Rowden." The sights looked amiable and took vermouth. "You cut the studio today," said Elliot, suddenly turning on Clifford, who avoided his eyes. "To commune with nature?" observed Rowden. "What's her name this time?" asked Elliot, and Rowden answered promptly, "Name Yvette, nationality Breton." "Wrong," replied Cliff friendly. "It's Rue Barré." The subject changed instantly, and Selby listened in surprise to names which were new to him, and eulogies on the latest Prix de Rome winner. He was delighted to hear opinions boldly expressed and points honestly debated, though the vehicle was mostly slang, both English and French. He longed for the time when he too should be plunged into the strife for fame. The bells of St. Tropez struck the hour, and the palace of the Luxembourg was answered chime on chime. With the glance of the sun dipping low in the golden dust behind the Palais Bourbon, they rose and turned on the east, crossing the Boulevard Saint-Germain, and sauntered toward the École de Médecine. At the corner, a girl passed by them, walking hurriedly. Clifford smirked. Elliot and Rowden were agitated, but they all bowed, and without raising her eyes, she returned their salute. But Selby, who had lagged behind, fascinated by some gay shop window, looked up to meet two of the bluest eyes he had ever seen. The eyes were dropped in an instant, and the young fellow hastened to overtake the others. "By Jove," he said, "do you fellows know I have just seen the prettiest girl?" Exclamation broke from the trio, gloomy foreboding like the chorus in a Greek play. "Rue Barré." "What?" cried Selby, bewildered. The only answer was a vague gesture from Clifford. 2 hours later, during dinner, Clifford turned to Selby and said, "You want to ask me something. I can tell by the way you fidget about." "Yes, I do," he answered, instantly enough. "What about that girl? Who is she?" In Rowden's smile there was pity, in Elliot's bitterness. "Her name," said Clifford solemnly, "is unknown to anyone, at least," he added with much conscientiousness, "as far as I can learn. Every fellow in the quarter bows to her, and she returns the salute gravely. No man has ever been known to obtain more than that. Her profession, judging from her music roll, is that of pianist. Her residence is a small and humble street which is kept a perpetual process of repair by the city authorities, and from the black letters painted on the barrier which defends the street from the terrace, she has taken the name by which we know her, Rue Barré. Mr. Rowden, in his imperfect knowledge of the French, called our attention to it as Rue Barré." "I didn't," said Rowden hotly, "and Rue Barré, or Rue Barré, as is today an object of adoration, to every rapine in the quarter. We are not rapines, corrected Elliot. I'm not, returned Clifford, and I beg to call to your attention, Selby, these two gentlemen have at veracious and apparently unfortunate moments offered to lay down life and limb at the feet of Rue Barry. The lady possesses a chilling smile which he uses on such occasions, and here he became gloomily imperative. I have been forced to believe that neither the scholarly grace of my friend Elliot nor the buxom beauty of my friend Rodin have touched that heart of ice. Elliot and Rodin, boiling with indignation, cried out, "And you?" "I," said Clifford plainly, "do fear to tread where you rush in." Chapter 2. 24 hours later, Selby had completely forgotten Rue Barry. During the week, he had worked with might and main at the studio, and Saturday night found him so tired that he went to bed before dinner, and had a nightmare about a river of yellow ochre in which he was drowning. Sunday morning, apropos of nothing at all, he thought of Rue Barry, and 10 seconds afterward he saw her. It was at the flower market on the marble bridge. She was examining a pot of pansies. The gardener had evidently thrown heart and soul into the transaction, but Rue Barry shook her head. It is a question whether Selby would have stopped then and there to inspect a cabbage rose had not Clifford unwound for him the yarn of the previous Tuesday. It is possible that his curiosity was piqued. I forgot to change the track. There we go. Sorry, my bad. It is possible that his curiosity was piqued, for with the exception of a hen turkey or a boy of 19, is the most openly curious biped alive. From 20 until death he tries to conceal it, but to be fair, Selby, it is also true, the market was attractive. Under a cloudless sky, the flowers were packed and heaped along the marble bridge to the parapet. The air was soft. The sun spun a shadow lacework among the palms and glowed in the hearts of 1,000 roses. Spring had come, was in full tide. The watering carts and sprinklers spread freshness over the boulevard. The sparrows had been vulgarly obtrusive, and the credulous Saint Angler anxiously followed his gaudy quill floating among the soapsuds of the liveries. The white spiked chestnuts, clad in tender green, vibrated with the humble bees. Shoddy butterflies flaunted their winter rags among the heliotrope. There was a smell of fresh earth in the air, an echo of the woodland brook and the ripple of the Seine, and swallows soared and skimmed among the ochred rivercraft. Somewhere in a window a caged bird was singing its heart out to the sky. Selby looked at the cabbage rose and then at the sky. Something in the song of the caged bird may have moved him, or perhaps it was that dangerous sweetness in the air of May. At first, he was hardly conscious that he had sobbed. Then he was scarcely conscious why he had sobbed. Then he thought he would move on. Then he thought he wouldn't. Then he looked at Rue Barry. The gardener said, "Mademoiselle, this is undoubtedly a fine pot of pansies." Rue Barry shook her head. The gardener smiled. She evidently did not want the pansies. She had brought many pots of pansies there, 2 or 3 every spring, and never argued. What did she want? The pansies were evidently a feeler toward a more important transaction. The gardener rubbed his hands and grazed about him. "These tulips are magnificent," he observed. "These hyacinths to a trance at the mere sight of the scented thickets." "That," murmured Rue, pointing to a splendid rose bush with her furled parasol. But in spite of her voice trembled a little. Selby noticed. More shame to him that he was listening. The gardener noticed it, and bearing his nose on the roses, scented a bargain. Still, to do him justice, he did not add a sentiment to the honest value of the plant. After all, Rue was probably poor, and anyone could see she was charming. 50 francs, mademoiselle." The gardener's tone was grave. Rue felt that argument would be wasted. They both stood silent for a moment. The gardener did not eulogize his price. The rose tree was gorgeous, and anyone could see it. "I will take the pansies," said the girl, and drew 2 francs from a worn purse. Then she looked up. A teardrop stood in the way, refracting the light like a diamond, but as it rolled into a little corner by her nose, a vision of Selby replaced it. And when a brush of their handkerchief had cleared the starlit blue eyes, Selby himself appeared, very much embarrassed. He instantly looked up to the sky, apparently devoured with a thirst for oh my gosh. He instantly looked up to the sky, apparently devoured with a thirst for astronomical research, and as he continued his investigations for fully 5 minutes, the gardener looked up too, and so did a policeman. Then Selby looked at the tips of his boots. The gardener looked at him. The policeman slouched on. Rouberie had been gone some time. "Well, said the gardener, "may I offer monsieur?" Selby never knew why, but he suddenly began to buy flowers. The gardener was electrified. Never before had he sold so many flowers, never at such satisfying prices, and never with such absolute unanimity of opinion with the customer. He missed the bargaining, the arguing, the calling of heaven to witness. The transaction lacked spice. "These tulips are magnificent." "They are," cried Selby warmly. "But alas, they are dear. I will take them." "Dieu," murmured the gardener in perspiration. "He's madder than most Englishmen. This cactus is gorgeous. Alas, send it with the rest." Gardener braced himself against the splendid rosebush, he began faintly. "Let's see. That splendid rosebush," she began faintly. "It's a beauty. I believe it is 50 francs. He stopped, very red. The gardener relished his confusion. Then a sudden cool self-possession took the place of his momentary confusion. He held the gardener with his eye and bullied him. "Take that bush. Why did not the young lady buy it? Mademoiselle is not wealthy." "How did you know?" "Dim, I sell her many pansies. Pansies are not expensive." "Those are the pansies she bought. These, monsieur, the blue and gold." "Then you intend to send them to her at midday after the market?" "At midday after the market. Take this rosebush with them," and he glared at the gardener. "Don't you dare say from whom they came." The gardener's eyes were like saucers, but Selby, calm and victorious, said, "Send the others to the Hotel des Sons, 7 Rue de Tonton. I will leave directions with the concierge." Then he buttoned his glove with much dignity and stalked off. But when well around the corner and hidden from the gardener's view, the conviction that he was an idiot came home to him in a fierce blush. 10 minutes later, he sat in his room, and the Hotel du Senat, repeating with an imbecile smile, "What an ass I am, what an ass." An hour later, found him in the same chair, in the same position, his hat and gloves still on, his stick in his hand, but he was silent, apparently lost in contemplation of his boot toes. And his smile was less imbecile, and even a bit retrospective. Chapter 3. About 5 o'clock that afternoon, the little sad-eyed woman who fills the position of concierge at the Hotel du Senat held up her hands in amazement to see a wagon load of flower-bearing shrubs drawn up for the doorway. She called Joseph, the intemperate garçon, who, while calculating the value of flowers in petit verre, gloomily disclaimed any knowledge of their destination. "Voyons," said the little concierge. "Cherchons les femmes." "You," he suggested. The little woman suggested a moment pensive, and then sighed. Joseph caressed his nose, a nose for which gaudiness could vie with any floral display. Then the little gardener came in, hat in hand. A few minutes later, Selby stood in the middle of his room, his coat off, his shirt sleeve rolled up. The chamber originally contained, beside the furniture, about 2 square feet of walking room, and now this was occupied by a cactus. The bed groaned under their crates of pansies, lilies, and heliotrope. The lounge was covered with hyacinth and tulips. and the washstand supported a species of young tree warrant to bear flowers at some time or another. Clifford came in a little more, fell over a box of sweet peas, swore a little, apologized, and then, as the full splendor of the floral feet burst upon him, sat down in astonishment upon a geranium. The geranium was erect, but Selby said, "Don't mind," and glared at the cactus. "Are we going to give a ball?" demanded Clifford. "No, I'm very fond of flowers," said Selby, but the statement lacked enthusiasm. "I should imagine so," and after a silence, "That's a fine cactus." Selby contemplated the cactus, touched it with an air of a connoisseur, and pricked his thumb. Clifford poked a pansy with his stick. Then Joseph came in with the bill, announcing the sum total in a loud voice, partly to impress Clifford, partly intimidate Selby into disgorging a pourboire which he would share, if he chose, with the gardener. Clifford tried to pretend he had not heard, while Selby paid bill and tribute without a murmur. Then he lounged back to the room, and with an attempt at indifference, which failed entirely, when he tore his trousers on the cactus. Clifford made some commonplace remark, lighted his cigarette, and looked out the window to give Selby a chance. Selby tried to take it, but getting as far as, "Yes, spring is here at last," froze solid. He looked at the back of Clifford's head. It expressed volumes. Those little perked-up ears seemed tingling with the suppressed glee. He made a desperate effort to master the situation, and jumped up to reach for some Russian cigarettes as an incentive to conversation, but he was foiled by the cactus, to whom he fell prey. The last straw was added. "Damn the cactus." This observation was wrung from Selby against his wall, against his own instinct of self-preservation. But the thorns on the cactus were long and sharp, and their repeated prick his pent-up wrath escaped. It was too late now, when it was done and Clifford had wheeled around. "See here, Selby, why the deuce did you buy those flowers?" "I'm fond of them," said Selby. "What are you going to do with them? You can't sleep here." "I can if you'll help me take the pansies off the bed." "Where can you put them?" Couldn't I give them to the concierge?" As soon as he said, he regretted it. What in heaven's name would Clifford think of him? He had heard the amount of the bill. Would he believe that he invested these luxuries as a timid declaration to his concierge? And would the Latin Quarter comment upon his own brutal fashion? He dreaded ridicule, and he knew Clifford's reputation. Then somebody knocked. Selby looked at Clifford. The haunting expression, he touched that young man's heart. It was a confession, same time as supplication. Clifford jumped up, threaded his way through the floral labyrinth, and put an eye to the floor. Said, "Who the devil is it?" This grateful style of reception is indigenous to the quarter. "It's Elliot," he said, looking back, "and Radin, too, and their bulldogs." Then he addressed them through the crack. "Sit down on the stairs. Selby and I are coming out directly. Discretion is a virtue. The Latin Quarter possesses few, and discretion seldom figure on the list." They sat down and began to whistle. Presently, Radin came out. "I smell flowers. They feast within." You ought to know Selby better than that," growled Clifford behind the door, while the other hurriedly exchanged his torn trousers for others. "We know Selby," said Elliot with emphasis. "Yes," said Radin. "He gives reception with floral decorations and invites Clifford while we sit on the stairs." "Yes, while the youth and beauty of the quarter revel," suggesting Radin with a sudden misgiving. "Is Odette there?" "See here," said Domenico. "Is Colette there?" Then he raised his voice in a plaintive howl. "You there, Colette, while I'm kicking my heels on these tiles." "Clifford is capable of anything," said Radin. "His nature is soured since Rubery sat on him." Elliot raised his voice. "I say, you fellows, we saw some flowers carried into Rubery's house at noon." "Posies and roses," specified Radin. "Probably for her," added Elliot, caressing his bulldog. Clifford turned with a sudden suspicion upon Selby. The latter hummed a tune, selected a pair of gloves, and choosing a dozen cigarettes, placed them in a case. Then, walking over to the cactus, he deliberately detached a blossom. threw it through his buttonhole, and picked up hat and stick, smiled upon Clifford, at which the latter was mightily troubled. Chapter 4. Monday morning at Julian, students fought for places. Students with prior claims drove away others who had been anxiously squatting on a coveted taboret since the door was opened in hopes of appropriating them at roll call. Students squabbled over palettes, brushes, portfolios, or rent with air with demands for Cicerone bread. The former a dirty ex-model who had in palmier days posed as Judas, now dispensed stale bread at 1 sou and made enough to keep himself in cigarettes. Monsieur Julien walked in, smiled a fatherly smile, and walked out. His disappearance was followed by the apparition of the clerk, a foxy creature who flitted through the battling hordes in search of prey. 3 men who had not paid dues were caught and summoned. A 4th was scented. Followed, outflanked his retreat towards the door cut off, and finally captured behind the stove. About that time, the revolution assuming an acute form, howls rose for Jules. Jules came umpired 2 fights with a sad resignation in his big brown eyes, shook hands with everybody, and melted away in the throng. Leaving an atmosphere of peace and goodwill, the lions sat down with the lambs, and messengers marked the best places for themselves and friends, and mounting the model stands, opened for roll calls. The words were passed. To begin with C's this week. They did. Clisson jumped like a flash and marked his name on chalk before a front seat. Caron galloped to a securer's place. Bang went an easel. Adieu in French. Where in the... are you going? English. Crash, a paintbox fell in the brushes, and all on board. Dieu. Spat. A blow, a short rush, and a clinched scuffle. The voice of the massier stern and reproachful. Cochon! And the roan call was resumed. Clifford. Sayre paused and looked up, one finger between the leaves of the ledger. Clifford. Clifford was not there. He was about 3 miles away in a direct line, and every instant increased over the distance. Not that he was walking fast. On the contrary, he was strolling with the leisurely gait peculiar to himself. Elliot was beside him, and 2 bulldogs covered the rear. Elliot was reading the Gil Blas, from which he seemed to extract amusement, but deeming bourgeois mirth unsuitable to Clifford's state of mind, subdued his amusement to a series of discreet smiles. The latter, moodily aware of this, said nothing, but leading the way into the Luxembourg garden, installed himself upon a bench above the northern terrace and surveyed the landscape with disfavor. Elliot, according to Luxembourg regulations, tied the 2 dogs, and then, with an interrogative glance toward his friend, resumed the Gil Blas, and the discreet smiles. The day was perfect. The sun hung over Notre Dame, setting the city in a glitter. The tender foliage of the chestnuts cast a shadow over the terrace and flecked the paths, and walked with tracery so fine that Clifford might here have found encouragement for his violent impressions, had he but looked. But as usual in this period of his career, his thoughts were anywhere except in his profession. Around about, the sparrows quarreled and chattered their courtship songs. The big rosy pigeons sailed from tree to tree. The flies whirled in the sunbeams, and the flowers exhaled 1,000 perfumes which stirred Clifford with languorous wistfulness. Under this influence he spoke. Elliot, you are a true friend. You make me ill, replied the latter, folding his friend. Just as I thought. You are tagging after some new petticoat again. And, he continued roughly, this is what you've kept me away from Julian's for. If it's to fill me up with the perfections of some little idiot. Not idiot, Mr. Clifford gently. See here, cried Elliot. Have you the nerve to try to tell me that you are in love again? Again? Yes, again and again and again, and by George, have you? This, observed Clifford sadly, is serious. For a moment, Elliot would have laid hands on him, then he laughed from sheer helplessness. Go on, let's see. There's Clemence and Marie Tillec and Cosette and Fifney and Colette, Marie, dear, whom are charming, most charming, but I never was serious. So help me, Moses, said Elliot calmly. Each and every one of those named have separately and in turn torn your heart with anguish, and have also made me lose my place at Julian's this same manner. Each and every one separately and in turn. Do you deny it? What you say may be founded in facts, in a way, but give me the credit of being faithful to one at a time, until the next came along. But this is really different, Elliot. Believe me, I'm all broken up. Then, there being nothing else to do, Elliot gnashed his teeth and listened. It's Rue Barry. Well, observed Elliot with scorn, you're moping and moping over that girl, the girl who has given you and myself every reason to wish that the ground would open up and engulf us. Well, do go on. Going on, I don't care. Timidity has fled. Yes, your native timidity. Desperate, Elliot. Am I in love? Never did I feel so miserable. Can't sleep, honestly. I'm incapable of eating properly. Same symptoms noticed in the case of Colette. Listen, will you? On a moment. I know the rest by heart. Let me ask something. Is it your belief that Rubery is a pure girl? Yes, said Clifford, turning red. Do you love her? Not as you dangle and tiptoe after every petty inanity. I mean, do you honestly love her? Yes, said the other doggedly. I would... Hold on a moment. Would you marry her? Clifford turned scarlet. Yes, he muttered. Pleasant news for your family, growled in suppressed fury. Dear father, I've just married a charming Grisette for whom I'm sure you'll welcome and you'll welcome with open arms, in company with her mother, a most estimable and cleanly washed lady. Good heavens. This seems to have gone a little further than the rest. Thank you stars, young man, that my head is a level enough for both. In this case, I have no fear. Rubery is set on your aspiration in a manner unmistakably final. Rubery, began Clifford, drawing himself up. But he suddenly ceased. For there, where the dappled sunlight glowed in spots of gold along the sun-flecked path, tripped Rubery. Her gown was spotless, and her big straw hat, tipped a little from the white forehead, threw a shadow across her eyes. Elliot stood up and bowed. Clifford removed his head covering with an air so plaintive, so appealing, so utterly humble that Ray smiled. The smile was delicious, and when Clifford, incapable of sustaining himself on his legs from sheer astonishment, toppled slightly, she smiled again in spite of herself. A few moments later, she took a chair on the terrace, and drawing a book from her music roll, turned the pages, found the place, then, placing it up and downwards in her lap, sighed a little, smiled a little, looked down over the city. She had nearly forgotten Foxhall Clifford. After a while, she took up her book again, but instead of reading, began to adjust a rose in her corsage. The rose was big and red. It glowed like fire there over her heart, and like fire it warmed her heart. Now fluttering under the silken petals, Rubery sighed again. She was very happy. The sky was so blue, the air so soft and perfumed, the sunshine so caressing, and her heart sank within her, sang to the rose in her breast. This is what it sang. Out to the throng of passers-by, out to the world of yesterday, out to the millions passing, one has turned aside to me. So her heart sang under his nose, her breast. The two big, mouse-colored pigeons came whistling by and alighted on the terrace, where they bowed and strutted and bobbed and turned until Rubery laughed in delight, and looking up, beheld Clifford before her. His hat was in his hand, and his face wreathed of appealing smiles which would have touched the heart of a Bengal tiger. For an instant, Rubery frowned, then she looked curiously at Clifford. Then she saw the resemblance between his brows and the bobbing pigeons. In spite of herself, her lips parted in the most bewitching laugh. Was this Rubery so changed that she did not know herself? But that song in her heart, which drowned all else, which trembled on her lips, struggled for utterance. She rippled forth and laughed at nothing, as a strutting pigeon and Mr. Clifford. You think, because I returned the salute to the students in the quarter, that you may be perceived in particular as a friend. I do not know you, monsieur, but vanity is man's other name. Be content, monsieur Vanity. I shall be most punctilious in returning your salute. But I implore you, let me render you that homage which has so long... Dear, I don't care for homage. Let me only be permitted to speak to you now and then, occasionally, very occasionally. And if you, why not another? Well, I'll be discretion itself. Discretion? Why? Her eyes were very clear, and Clifford winced for a moment, but only for a moment. Then the devil of frankness seized him. He sat down and offered himself, soul and body, goods and chattels. The time he knew he was a fool, and that infatuation is not love. That each word he uttered bound him in honor from which there was no escape. And all the time, Elliot was scowling down at the Fountain Plaza and savagely checking both bulldogs from their desire to rush to Clifford's rescue. For even they felt there was something wrong, as Elliot stormed within himself and growled maledictions. When Clifford finished, began in a glow of excitement. But Rubery's response was long in coming. His ardor cooled while the situation slowly assumed in its just proportions. Then regret began to keep in. But he put that aside and broke out again in protestations. At first word, Rubery checked him. "I thank you," she said, speaking very gravely. "No man has ever offered me marriage." She turned and looked out over the city. While she spoke again, "For me a great deal. I am alone. I have nothing. I am nothing." She turned back and looked at Paris. Breathed fair in the sunshine of a perfect day. He followed her eyes. She murmured, "It's hard. Hard to work always. Always alone with never a friend you can have in honor. And that love that is offered means the streets. The boulevard. When passion is dead. I know it. We know it. We others who have nothing. Have no one and who give it ourselves. Unquestioning when we love, yes, unquestioning heart and soul, knowing the end." She touched the rose at her breast. For a moment she seemed to forget him, then, quietly, "I thank you. I'm grateful." She opened the book and plucked a petal from a rose, dropped it between the leaves, then looked up. Looked up, she said gently, "I cannot accept." No, thank gosh. It took Clifford a month to entirely recover. The first week he was pronounced convalescent by Elliot, who was in authority, and his convalescence was aided by the cordiality with which Rubery acknowledged his solemn salutes. 40 times a day he blessed Rubery for a refusal, and thanked his lucky stars at the same time. O wondrous heart of ours, he suffered the tortures of the blighted. Elliot was annoyed, partly by Clifford's reticence, partly by the inexplicable thaw and the frigidity of Rubery. At their frequent encounters, when she, tripping along the Rue des Sons, with music roll and big straw hat, would pass Clifford and his familiar steering in easterly ports to Café Vacher, and at the respectful uncovering of the band, would color and smile at Clifford. Elliot's slumbering suspicions awoke, but he never found out anything, and finally gave it up as beyond his comprehension, merely qualifying Clifford as an idiot, and reserving his opinion of Rubery. And all this time, Selby was jealous. At first he refused to acknowledge it to himself, and cut the studio for a day in the country, but the woods and fields of course aggravated his case, and the brooks babbled of Rubery berets, and the mowers calling to each other across the meadow ended in quavering, "Rubery." That day spent in the country made him angry for a week, but he worked sulkingly at Julian's, the time tormented by his desire to know where Clifford was, and what he might be doing. This culminated in an erratic stroll on Sunday, which ended at the flower market on the Pont du Champ, began again, was gloomily extended to the morgue, and again ended at the marble bridge. It would never do, and Selby felt it, so he went to see Clifford, who was convalescing on mint juleps in the garden. They sat down together, discussed morals and human happiness, and each found the other most entertaining. Only Selby failed to pump Clifford to the other's unfeigned amusement. But the julep spread balm on the sting of jealousy, trickled hope to the blighted. And when Selby said he must go, Clifford went too, and when Selby, not to be outdone, insisted on accompanying Clifford back to his door, Clifford determined to see Selby sell hubby back halfway, and then finding it hard to part, they decided to dine together, and flit. To flit, a verb applied to Clifford's nocturnal prowls, expressed, perhaps, as well as anything. The gaiety proposed, dinner was ordered at Mignon's, and while Selby interviewed the chef, Clifford kept a fatherly eye on the butler. The dinner was a success, or was the sort generally termed a success toward the dessert. Selby heard someone say was at a great distance, "Kid Selby drunk as a lord." A group of men passed near them. It seemed to him that he shook hands and laughed a great deal. And then everyone was very witty. There was Clifford opposite, swearing under the confidence in his chum Selby, and there seemed to be others there. either seated beside them or continuing passing with the swish of skirts on the polished floor. The perfume of roses, the rustle of fans, the touch of rounded arms, and the laughter grew vaguer and vaguer. The room seemed enveloped in mist. Then all in the moment each object stood out painfully distinct. Only forms and visages were distorted and noises piercing. He drew himself up, calm, grave for the moment, master of himself, but very drunk. He knew he was drunk, and was as guarded, as alert, as keenly suspicious of himself as he would have been of a thief at his elbow. His self-command enabled Clifford to hold his head safely under some running water, and repair to the street considerably the worse for wear, but never suspecting that his companion was drunk. For a time he kept his self-command. His face was only a bit paler, a bit tighter than usual. He was only a trifle slower and more fastidious in his speech. It was midnight when he let Clifford peacefully slumbering in someone's armchair with a long suede glove dangling in his hand, and a plumy boa twisted about his neck to protect his throat from drafts. He walked through the hall and down the stairs and found himself on the sidewalk in a quarter he did not know. Mechanically he looked up the name of the street. The name was not familiar. He turned and steered his course towards some lights clustered at the end of the street. They had proved further away than he had anticipated. After a long quest he came to the conclusion that his eyes had been mysteriously removed from their proper places. It had been reset on either side of his head like those of a bird. It grieved him to think of the inconvenience this transformation might occasion him. He attempted to cock up his head, hen-like, to test the mobility of his neck. Then immense despair stole over him. Tears gathered into the tear ducts. His heart melted and collided with a tree. This shocked him to comprehension. He stifled a violent tenderness in his breast, picked up his hat, and moved on more briskly. His mouth was white and drawn, his teeth tightly clenched. He held his course pretty well and strayed but little, and after an apparent interminable length of time found himself passing a line of cabs. The brilliant lamps, red, yellow, and green, annoyed him, and he felt it might be pleasant to demolish them with his cane. But mastering his impulse, he passed on. Later in an eye struck him that it would save fatigue to take a cab, and he started back with that intention. But the cab seemed already so far away and the lantern so bright and confusing that he gave it up, and pulled himself together. Look around. A shadow, a mass huge and defined, rose to his right. He recognized the Arc de Triomphe, and gravely shook his cane at it. Its size annoyed him. He felt it was too big. Then he heard something fall clattering to the pavement, and thought probably it was his cane, but it didn't matter much. Didn't much matter. When his eyes himself and regained the control of his right leg, which betrayed symptoms of insubordination, he found himself traversing the place deep on Concord, at which a place which threatened to land him at the Madeleine would never do. He turned sharply to the right, and cutting across the bridge, passed the Palais Bourbon at a trot, and wheeled into the Boulevard Saint-Germain. He got on well enough through the size of the War Office to struck him as a personal insult, and he missed his cane, which would have been pleasant to drag along the iron railings as he passed. It occurred to him, however, to substitute his hat, for when he found it, he forgot what he wanted it for and replaced it on his head with gravity. Then he was obliged to battle with a violent inclination to sit down and weep. This lasted until he came to the Rue de Reims. But there he became so absorbed in contemplating the dragon on the balcony, overchanging the Cour de Dragon, and time slipped away until he remembered vaguely that he had no business there, and marched off again. It was slow work. The inclination to sit down and weep had been given a place for solitary and deep reflection. Here his right leg forgot its obedience, and attacking the left outflanked it brought him against a wooden board which seemed to bar his path. He tried to walk around for it, but found the street closed. He tried to push it over and found he couldn't. Then he noticed a red lantern standing on a pile of paving stones inside the barrier. This was pleasant. How was he to get home if the boulevard was blocked? But he was not on the boulevard. His treacherous right leg had beguiled him to a detour. From there, behind him, lay the boulevard with endless lines of lamps. And here, where this arrow dilapidated street piled up with earth and mortars and heaps of stone, he looked up. Written in staring black letters in the barrier was Rue Barry. He sat down. Two policemen whom he knew came by and advised him to get up, but he argued the question from a standpoint of personal taste, and they passed on, laughing, for he was at that moment absorbed in a problem. It was how to see Rue Barré. She was somewhere or other in that big house with iron balconies and the doors locked, but what of that? The simple idea struck him. He decided to... But it struck him to shout until she came. This idea was replaced by another equally lucid, to hammer on the door until she came out, but finally rejected both of these as too uncertain. He decided to climb into the balcony, and opening a window, politely inquire for Rue Barré. There was but one lighted window in the house that he could see. It was on the second floor, and toward this he cast his eye. The mounting wooden barrier and clambering over the pile of stones. He reached the sidewalk and looked at the facade for a foothold. It seemed impossible, but a sudden fury seized him. A blind, drunken obstinacy. The blood rushed to his hand, leaping, beating at his ears like the dull thunder of an ocean. He set his teeth, and springing at a window sill, dragged himself up and hung to the iron bars. Then reason fled. There surged in his brain this sound of many voices. His heart leaped up, beating a mad tattoo, and gripping at cornice and ledge he worked his way along the facade, and clung to pipes and shutters, and dragged himself up, over and into the balcony by the lighted window. His hat fell off and rolled against the pane. For a moment, he leaned breathlessly against the railing. Then the window was slowly opened from within. They stared at each other for some time. Presently, the girl took 2 unsteady steps back into the room. He saw her face all crimson now. He saw her sink into a chair by the lamplit table, and without a word he followed her into the room, closing the big door-like panes behind him. Then he looked at each other in silence. The room was small and white. Everything was white about it. The curtained bed, the little washstand in the corner, the bare walls, the china lamp, and his own face. He had known it, but the face and neck of Rue were surging in a color that died. The blossoming rose tree that on the hearth there on the hearth beside her. It did not occur to him to speak. She seemed not to expect it. His mind was struggling with the impression of the room. The whiteness, the extreme purity, everything occupied him, began to trouble him. His eyes became accustomed to the bulb. Other objects grew from the surroundings and took their place with the circle of lamplight. There was a piano and a coal scuttle, and a little iron trunk and a bathtub. There was a row of wooden pegs against the door, and a white chintz curtain covering the clothes underneath. On the bed lay an umbrella and a big straw hat, and on the table a music scroll unfurled, an inkstand and sheets of ruled paper. Behind him stood a wardrobe faced with mirror, but somehow he did not care to see his own face. Just then he was sobering. The girl at last looked at him without a word. Her face was expressionless, yet the lips at times trembled almost imperceptibly. Her eyes, so wonderfully blue in daylight, seemed dark and soft as velvet, and the color on her red deepened and whitened. With every breath, she seemed smaller and more slender than when he had seen her in the street, and there was now something in the curve of her cheek almost infantine. When at last he turned and caught his own reflection in the mirror behind him, a shock passed through him, as though he had seen a shameful thing. In his cloud mind and his cloud thoughts grew clearer. For a moment their eyes met. His sought the floor, his lips tightened, and the struggle within him bowed his head and strained every nerve to the breaking. And now it was over, for the voice within him had spoken. He listened, duly interested, but already knowing the end. Indeed, it little mattered. The end would always be the same for him. He understood now, always the same for him. And he listened, dully interested in a voice to which grew within him. After a while he stood up, and she rose at once, one small hand resting on a table. Presently he opened the window, picked up his hat, and shut it again. Then he went over to the rose bush, touched the blossom with his face. One was sticking in a glass of water on the table, and mechanically the girl drew it out, pressed it with her lips, and laid it on the table beside him. He took it without a word, and crossing the room opened the door. The landing was dark and silent, but the girl lifted the lamp, and gliding past him, slipped down the polished stairway to the hallway. Then, unchanging the bolts, she drew open the iron wicket. Through this he passed with his rose. The end. And that is the end of King in Yellow. Which there was, hold on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stories, and I feel like how many of them actually had the King in Yellow in them as a plot device? 1, 2, 3, 4. Five. I feel like 6, maybe 5 or 6. Nah, kind of more 5. I mean, there's stories that are connected with them, but 5 of these stories have nothing to do with are not do not have very little to do with the King in Yellow. And one of those 5, honestly, names pretty like very only because some names show up. I'm not saying they're bad or anything. I'm just yeah. So, just any kind of collection felt it kind of a mixed bag. I mean, kind of the last the last 4, I want to say. Yeah, last 4. Um, we're just kind of more like straight short stories. I know it was interesting, like they obviously are all connected or whatever, but they really all had like nothing. Unless I'm completely missing it. Which I totally could be. But and I don't know. I mean, overall, they're pretty good. I mean, I guess of those type stories are overall pretty good. Just bros, bros, bros descriptions on some stuff. Um, I don't know. I've heard like some people mention or whatever, like of how like descriptive Tolkien is, which I suppose he is. But when people just talk of like really that's descriptive, I tend to think of like this, where it's, oh my gosh, please. Could you cut this in half? If you cut this in a half, it would not change. Uh, there's that there's a lot of interesting stuff in it, stuff like that on like some of the stories. It's just some of the language at some point just kind of feels more with how much on like descriptive and stuff or whatever. It just feels somewhat self-indulgent. It kind of falls a little bit into that territory. It leans into it. But overall, okay. But I hope y'all enjoyed that. Um, was this a jerk with y'all? So, if you enjoyed these readings, and so we will be starting up. Uh, I hope you'll enjoy The King in Yellow by it's Robert Chambers, right? Yes, Robert W. Chambers. But yeah, so I hope to see y'all. We start up reading some next stuff.